Landscape and site design is a complicated world of design, even without the considerations of how do you make this stuff in Revit and how do you render it using Lumion, our renderer of choice. And there are quite a few different areas that we need to consider. One is how do you actually make landscape in Revit, and then how do you manipulate it? And how do you deal with putting the building and other elements on your landscape? And finally, how do you render this puppy so it looks beautiful? So let's begin by talking about toposolids in Revit. So first of all, how do you actually create Revit landscapes? Well, there is a tool on the Massing and Site tab called toposolid. And toposolids are great. You can either create them from a sketch or from an imported point cloud or other type of 3D geometry. And I'm just going to create one right here. Click the create box. You go into edit mode, which is a familiar zone for similar to creating floors and things. And you have all the usual drawing tools. I'm just going to draw a rectangle for this particular demonstration. And you can see you get the usual controls for dimensions and things like that here. We'll make a nice square. And the sketch is editable after the fact. And then all you have to do is just click the checkbox to finish editing that solid. You might say, wow, that's really boring. It's just a square. We can shade this view. You'll see it's green like a site. And so is this one. It is green like a site. And why is it green? Well, it is made up of multiple layers, kind of like a floor structure. If you choose edit type, you will see that here it looks similar to a floor. It has a structure that you can go and view, and of course you can preview it, and it gives you the kind of stack of things. And this site is topped by 4 inches of grass, 6 inches of gravel, and 6 inches of earth. Obviously, this can be edited just like a floor. And in particular, if you have a very slopey site, it's not a bad idea to give the site some thickness that's a lot bigger than 6 inches. And the reason is that I think it kind of folds over on itself if things get too steep. And Revit basically says, I can't do that. So I'm going to give this 10 feet of thickness and OK. And you might, you see the preview, it's not to scale, so it just kind of, or it is to scale, but it's showing, it doesn't zoom in or out. It just basically shows that there's a lot more soil now than there is the kind of top surface. So anyway, hit apply and OK. And of course, nothing looks any different, except that the thickness of the site in this 3D view looks a lot thicker. And this is basically not terribly important unless you're doing a site section where you want it to show up correctly. So editing the toposolid couldn't be easier. Yeah, you just have to select it. And there are some real simple things. You can go back in and edit the sketch like you might a floor plan. There's this modify sub-elements feature. If you click on that, you'll see, and maybe I'll make this hidden line so that it's a little clearer. You'll see that there are lines. And lines have elevations, and all you have to do to change the elevation is just click and drag on it, and suddenly your slope, you can see here, it becomes kind of a wedge shape. So super easy to modify. Just click and drag. You can also type in a number, so if you have a particular number, you can type that in. So quite adaptable. You can also grab points. So if I move my mouse over this endpoint, or if I funky hit tab as I leave my mouse over it, I'll be able to select it. Now I can move just this point. And now as you look at the site, see how the contours are drawn for me as I make this steeper and steeper. And you can kind of see it in the section view here that I'm basically creating kind of a wedge shape. And again, you can type in a number, or if you had point clouds and other things, you can use those. A few other things that you can do in addition to modifying points here. Let me just use the modify tool. It ends the editing operation. You can add points in the middle of this object. And this is a little complicated because where are the points measured from? So this one here is at 19 feet. This point is at 0. And Revit gives you a couple of options. You can make it the current level, so any new point just is at your current level. But of course, you have to know what your current level is. You'd have to set that work plane. You could use the project base point. You could just surveyor point. But the top plane, I believe, will put a point on this surface. And you see how it gives me an elevation right there. So I'll click on that point. Oh, and I guess it didn't actually put it. It put it on that point. On the edge, but it looks like it made it at the 0 point, which is probably my work plane. So again, I'll select this object. If I want to modify it, I click Modify Elements, and I should be able to grab that point and move it up or down. Now I'm creating kind of a very complicated shape because I have multiple points. You want to get more complicated? Absolutely, you can do that. You can add in split lines. And split lines are awfully nice if, let's say, you want part of your site to change, but to have, say, a straight edge, maybe a point where there is some grading. Again, I'll click on the site, and maybe I'll just grab this whole line and move it. And it basically creates kind of a fold in the site. So let's say I wanted, I don't know, a road or something like that. I could come in here, create this split line, and flatten it out. And then I'll come back in, select the site, add another split line here, and I probably could be very precise and make sure these are parallel to each other, but sounds like a lot of work. So anyway, and now if I come in and modify the sub-elements, and whatever I do over here, those split lines that I drew will maintain that level. So it's kind of a great way to create kind of either a level area, a road, or a path. And it does not have to go edge to edge. I absolutely can come in, select the site, and add a split line in the middle of, say, a wall. And you can see here, a part of the site. And you can see here it starts to get quite complicated. And this is where other site tools may be more handy. There's something called Environment for Revit, which is actually much easier to use than, or it makes a lot of this editing a lot simpler. So that I'm not going to show that because it's a whole separate element. But again, you add in or you modify the line, split line that I added. I can add kind of a ridge in here. Again, it just gets a little hard to see what you're doing. I can see based on the contours what I'm adding. Here, I'll add a little peak onto this. And you can come in and shade the view. That sometimes is helpful. Adding in shadows is sometimes helpful, but sometimes not when you're trying to actually select the points. So be prepared to toggle shaded on and off. One other thing you can do is if you, say, have a roadway here or a path maybe that goes along the edge of the road or anywhere else, you can break or kind of create a copy of this contoured surface by using the subdivide tool. If you click subdivide, you can draw an area. I'm just going to go in the top view here so it's a little easier. And let's just say I want a straight path running right across this whole site. See how I'm drawing it on the ground, basically, or actually I guess I'm drawing it on my work plane. And once you sketch that path, and do remember that you are drawing a flat path on the ground, which will be projected up onto the toposolid, just click the checkbox, and it will create an area that is kind of a thickened section of your site. By default, it's 1 foot thick. You can make it whatever you want, but let's say I just want a little bit of elevation compared to the adjacent surfaces. I'll give it a 1 inch thickness. And again, you can create a material for these. I'm not sure what materials are even in this model, but here, we'll make it a brick pathway, even though that's pretty optimistic to think you can get brick to work over such a steep site. So, but anyway, the advantage of these subdivided surfaces is that if you come in and modify the toposolid again, if you're still designing and you want to come in and, I don't know, move the points around, see if we can find now, we want to go back to hidden line here and see if we can find some of those points that we're editing. Yeah, let's drop this, we'll make it go in the opposite direction, -2 feet. And so now I've basically made this a valley instead of a peak. And you can see that the path, the subdivision, has followed that new contour. So super handy when you want to have a road or something like that that follows the contours, but you're still editing the contours. So anyway, that's how you can subdivide the surface. Now, if you are editing the toposolid and it's getting a little too peaky or a little too pointy, you can simplify the toposolid. There's basically a simplify tool. Click on that and you can kind of control how simple it is. Let's say we want to remove, I don't know, 50% of the points. It kind of simplifies it a bit. Of course, you do lose some of the subtleties, which if you're working on a smaller project, you probably are going to be worried about those little subtleties, things like areas that you maybe want steeper slope or flatter slope, that kind of thing. Finally, what do you do if you want, say, a flat area of the site? Well, obviously, we added these all sorts of subdivisions here. We can do a number of things. You can select more than one point at a time. So I can come in and select these points. Let's see, and I can't quite read what elevation they're at, but I'm holding down Control to select more than one object at a time. Let's see if we can get all these guys. And you can, say, edit their height all at once. If they were different heights, you could make them, say, minus 2 feet. And you see how that entire area would change. And let's say you want an even slope. Again, I can select 2 of these objects and I can make them, I don't know, positive 2 feet. And it will slope that entire area. So selecting more than one point at a time is really handy. Again, just use Control, and you can use a selection window to select more than one point. You can also add lines in there and define their elevation in the options menu up here at the top. And one of the last simple things that we want to do to our site is to excavate an area. Let's say you want, I don't know, a patio or something like that. And to do that, you basically can use things like a floor. So I'm going to come in here, maybe I'll go to top view, and I'll just create a simple floor using good old Revit's floor tool here. Go to floor and make sure that it's at a level that's above ground. So I believe level 1 is above ground, and I don't even believe it matters what kind of floor. I'm going to draw it over here because at some point this site does go underground. So I'll click check here. Oh yeah, there we go. See, part of the floor is underground, part of the floor is above ground. I could have figured that out by selecting the level and seeing where it intersects with the site. Anyway, I'll select the floor, and let's say I just want this to be a flat patio. Well, when you draw a floor, it is typically flat. But then if I wanted to use it to excavate the site, basically select the site and then choose the excavate tool. And it uses floors, or interestingly enough, roofs, and I believe walls also, to excavate basically dig out where that floor is. So I'll choose excavate and then select the floor. And what you'll see is that it has basically removed part of the site. And again, this excavation, it follows the contours, and it also will modify, it'll change as you change your site design, as you modify the slope. Lastly, this floor that we have drawn, you can modify it just like you are modifying the site. You can come in here and choose modify sub-elements, and now I can actually slope the whole floor by using any number of tools. I can click and drag on, say, the endpoint here and move that one up and down. I can create an irregular surface. Let's say I have a garage over here. I can leave this point level, but I can create a fairly complicated slope either by moving lines or individual points. And, except I think I went a little too far that time. Again, you do have to kind of follow the laws of physics. But you can see that by modifying it, it's now cutting into the lower section of the slope. I'll just click off of it to create what looks like kind of a recessed patio. Again, you're often using this as a design tool, so you might not be sure exactly how much you want to excavate. And there are more sophisticated excavation tools that will actually give you more information, the cut and fill kind of volume, which is awesome, of course, and super handy in a professional setting. But just for the design stage, which is what we're at, using a floor, and this, of course, can be a floor in your building, that's a great way to basically get the site out of your basement because it doesn't look great when your basement is filled with dirt. Okay, let's take a look at an actual site from an actual project. This is the existing conditions for our studio project, at least for many of you. And what you'll see, first of all, you'll notice it's a funny shape. And the funny shape is due to the fact that this was some imported geometry, kind of some legacy geometry. So it just happened to have a funny outline to the contours, but that's okay. It still behaves like a normal toposolid. And the other thing is that the toposolid is pinned. This little teeny tiny pin prevents you from editing it. And of course, that is what we want. Often you don't want people to mess around with certain elements of your project. Structural grids come to mind as something that you wouldn't want to fiddle around with. So do use caution when you're unpinning things. In our case, I'm going to unpin it because this is a design project, so you do actually need to be able to edit it. And you'll see that once you do that, the modify sub-elements feature becomes highlighted, and you can come in and click on it, and you have a million points. And this would be one you probably would not want to simplify because there are actually existing contours on this site that are probably important to our small-scale design, which is a house. Now, you'll also notice in this case that there are some existing subdivisions here, which we can select separately. This is the actual outlines of our site. It is following the contours, and the same with the road that is the access road to our site. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is, let's see, if I go to top view, that my house is actually, and this is just an example, of course, is kind of off at a funny angle. And that is very common. Obviously, your site is usually complicated. It has, this one in particular has a lot of steep slopes. So in order to draw conveniently, anything that you draw is going to be at a funny angle here. You know, if I go and I create, say, a floor, it's not going to want to draw it aligned to the house. So, of course, that's silly. You do want to be able to draw it to the house. So let's go to the site plan floor here, view. And you can actually orient project north to be along whatever feature you want, but in our case, the edge of the house. Now, if I go to the Manage tab, and alas, my buttons here are looking a little small, thanks to the resolution of my screen, but you can see there's a little planet with a, I don't know, a target, an elevation target symbol. And there is the Rotate Project North button. Now, make sure you rotate that and not True North. True North is where is based on the kind of planetary position of your project, and that would mess up things like your daylighting. We don't want to do that, but we do want to rotate Project North. And there's a couple of options, 90 degrees clockwise, et cetera, but the one that we want, because, again, we have a house at a funny angle, just choose Align to Selected Line, and of course I need to make this hidden line so you can see the highlighting of that line. Basically, any edge you can click will rotate it. And you'll see that your whole site and everything has now rotated, and while I'm working on this feature, in this case the building, I can keep it at this angle, and then let's say I have another building, an outbuilding that's at a different angle. I can rotate Project North if it's convenient for that particular feature. Now, if we take a look at this building, I've built it into the site. If you take a close look at the edge of it, it's kind of built down. In fact, the bottom of the wall is actually quite deep in there. Let's go to wireframe mode. You can see how deep underground, and there's some objects underground. I put in some desks in the basement. I haven't put in any other floors. But what you'll see if you go to the basement floor plan is that, everything is underground. Now, you can absolutely just hide the toposolid using the visibility and graphic overrides. Come down here and look for the toposolid area here. There's a couple of different features to the toposolid, including the primary and secondary contour lines. You can hide some of them, or you can just hide the whole kit and caboodle. And now you can see into the basement, but that doesn't really solve our problem. What we want to do is remove the site. We want to excavate using the floor that we've drawn for the basement, and do use the lowest level of your project. So when you draw that floor for your project, make sure it's on, in our case, the basement. So, and like we did before, select the site and choose the excavate tool. And then move your mouse over the floor, and it will eliminate the base level. And now you can actually see that there's something up above as well that we couldn't see because the site was in the way. So again, toggling these different view styles is really helpful, because there's no way we would see any of that in this shaded mode. Well, one other thing that you like to add typically to your projects when you talk about the landscape is walls, landscape walls. And there's a couple of strategies for how to do it based partly on kind of what kind of wall you want. So I've drawn one that is basically a wall, you know, like a good old Revit wall family here. And you can see it's got some concrete block, presumably exterior grade concrete block. And it's got just a regular precast crown. When you go to the edit type and choose edit the structure, hopefully you have learned how to do this. You can see I put a sweep on top of this. To do that, if you haven't done it before, make sure you're viewing the preview in section mode, which one means you have to click the preview button down here in the wall types, and then make sure it's in section mode. And then over here, you'll see highlighted the sweeps menu. There are also reveals, which can be handy. And now when you click on the sweeps menu, you'll see there's a couple of options here. You can add in a new one. You can load in profiles if you've drawn your own. And then I just used one that's in the model already. But if you change it, say I'll just make it as wide as the concrete block, add a material, and then choose where it occurs, top or bottom. Anyway, hit apply, okay, and you'll see like, oh, it's not quite centered. That's probably a reason why I had it as the wider one. And a little bit of a drip edge is kind of nice anyway. So I'm just going to cancel out of that and hit cancel here. So that's how that wall is put together, and you just draw it like any other wall that you would in your project. You select it, you can modify the height. The big thing about this one is that the top is flat. So this is a particular look. Wherever this wall is in your site, you see the slope comes up against it, and you'll have to modify the slope to kind of look normal. But this is a particular look, and it has a very kind of neat composed look when the top is level. One thing to be aware of, if you are like, well, I actually want it to slope a little bit, and you go and edit the profile, as soon as you edit this profile, which you can do for regular walls, it will remove the parapet cap. It doesn't like gluing the parapet cap onto a profile that has been edited. And if you come in here and use a wall sweep, wall sweeps are only horizontal. So sadly, you can't place it. Well, sometimes we want our landscape walls to follow the contours. You think of your classic New England landscape of those stone walls, those just kind of follow the ups and downs of the contours. Well, to do that, we have to use a different tactic, which is creating a railing. So I'm going to click the railing tool, and let's just stick with this one for now. And what you can do, in this case, let's say I want to have an edge along this recess here. I can actually just pick those edges, and it will pick individual pieces. You see how it's actually drawing it on the ground here. So I think I may have missed that little piece there. There's a tiny little bit right there. And it's because it's breaking at every contour. Now, when I click the checkbox, you'll see that it has actually buried the landscape wall, and of course, or the railing in this case. And that actually can be a look if you want that look. However, we don't want that look. We want it to follow the contour. So just select the railing and choose Pick New Host. And now if you click on the landscape, see how the railing will now follow whatever those contours were. It will follow those contours. So let's take a look at this custom railing that I've created as a site wall. And just choose Edit Type, and what you'll see is typical of railings. There are multiple levels. There's a rail structure. You can also have balusters, although that doesn't make a lot of sense for a site like ours. We don't want any vertical pieces. Although if you did have thickened, say, posts, you could do it this way. And what I've done here, I've created basically two pieces: a cap and a main part of the retaining wall. And those are using custom families. So I've actually created a new railing family. You'd think, oh, aren't railings like those round things you grab on the way down the stairs? And well, actually they're not. You can make them rectangular or any shape that you want. And let's take a look at those railing families. And so the main wall, the kind of thickened part, you can see there's a top and a bottom of the rail that's below kind of the reference line. In fact, I've made it go down 1 foot below the reference line just so that we have some thickness underground. And you can change the offset in Revit once the railing is placed. But anyway, the height above the ground is about 3'6", and it's centered on whatever reference line you draw. And of course, you can move that left or right if you want it to be all inside, if you don't want any kind of dirt leaking into the wall. But let's just stick with it this way so we don't have to worry about the direction of the wall. And then I actually created a little parapet kind of cap to this thing that's set. I just copied the family to have this one show up right at the top of the wall. And this technique is terrific for those walls you want to follow along. And of course you can do chain link fence or other sorts of things. You can almost certainly find railing families down on the good old internet where you can get all sorts of different things. And so absolutely you can customize your site constructed walls quite easily using railings. So one frequent problem with these site walls is they actually want to be retaining walls. You want the part upslope of the wall to be higher by a good deal than the lower part. And in this case, I've got a set of stairs. In fact, maybe I should create myself a little opening in the wall so that I can get through the wall here where the stair is. You can just click the wall and choose wall opening. I'll just draw one right over here. There we go. Now I can get through my wall. Oh, that's much better. And but I actually want the site here to be a couple of feet taller. And you can see here in the section view that my wall, the heavy line for the site is actually a good deal lower than the wall at this point. And I want it to kind of match more or less the top of these stairs, and the lower part to be down at the lower part of the stairs. Well, how do I do that? Well, we just basically do what we have already tried to do, which is edit the site and add a split line. And it's not a bad idea to be in the top view of your site. I could go to site plan, but I'm just going to do it here in this view. The other thing that's not a bad idea is to make this wireframe mode. As we have seen, when you edit the site, it can be sometimes hard to see, one, where the points are. So I'm going to click Add Split Line, and it should show all of these points. But then also there's a big roof overhang, and I do want to be able to see the wall. Now, one question I have for myself is, what height should the top of the stairs be at? Now, I just kind of drew them in just as a test. One thing you can do, if you click Modify Sub-Elements, you can click on some of these points and find out their heights. So this contour line looks like it's at about 22'6". This one's at about 17'6", so a good 5 feet delta between the two of them. And let's see, these are about 20 feet, so maybe that's about the height I'll make the top of this wall, maybe a little bit taller. And so let me add my split line here. So I'll click Add Split Line. And the big thing with adding the split line, now we know the exact height we want it to be. So let's use the project base point. That's what all these individual points are measured from. And I think I said 20 feet 6 inches. I'll just type in 20.5. And I'll draw my split line, and I'll start all the way at one end of the house, and I can go over here to the other end of the wall, and I'll continue on this wall here up a little bit. And what I can do, let me go and come back and modify the sub-elements. And I'll select these lines that I drew. You can see the contours have already been modified as I adjust these. I'm going to put these split lines on one side of this site wall. Just making sure that I don't get too far away from the house here if I haven't drawn it terribly precisely. And maybe I'll even stretch it out just a little bit so it goes to the end of the house. So now what we should see, let me just click the modify tool so we can see what it looks like, and then tile or window tile so I can see my section. You should see that the site has now come up to meet that step. And of course I could select the step and make it go down an extra couple of inches, maybe, I don't know, 4 inches or so, depending on if you want there actually to be a lip at this point. I think actually a little bit of a lip is not a bad idea just for drainage standpoint, so I'll give it just a little 2-inch lip there. You do tend to get stuff kind of collecting up behind these walls, and it is a good idea to have a little bit of slope away from your house. You never want the water to drain all the way to your house if you can avoid it. Now, if you run into problems and the contours are not draining away as much, one thing you can do is you can come in here and go back to modify sub-elements, and you can select these points and modify their height. So for example, let's say I want these to be a little bit lower around the house. I can select them. Over here in the properties, it will tell me their height, and I could make them a little lower, say 19 foot 6 inches. Okay, and again, you'll see them in sections slope just a little bit more. So using a combination of the split lines, I can modify the height behind the wall. Now, what about on the other side? Well, if I remember correctly, this was, what, 17 foot 6? Okay, so maybe I'll make the base of the wall have a site height of about 18 feet. And again, I'm kind of doing this rounded, but it's the same process. You add in a split line. In this case, it just needs to start at this side of the wall, but make sure that it is using the project base point as the starting height, and make it whatever I said that height was, I believe 18 feet. And now I can just draw my line. Do remember, every time you draw a split line, you should check to make sure that it is at 18 feet. Every now and then I'll kind of get careless with my scroll wheel and end up not changing that height. And you can see the contours adjusting as we go. And you can also see in this section view how the site has changed. It has dropped down a little bit. I guess I have maybe one extra stair in there, so I could modify my stair to reduce the number of treads and risers. But either way, that is how you can create a site retaining wall that retains the soil behind it. Lastly, if you want to change how it slopes along the wall, it's kind of a dramatic slope there, we can modify either individual points. Go back here and grab, say, the lower point here and move it up just a hair, and that'll soften the contours. You can also just add a point in. Maybe we'll make that 19 feet, so some central point, and put it in there and kind of soften that edge just a little bit. Let's take a look what that looks like, and that's a little bit better. Well, now it's time to render the landscape, and rendering a landscape has some different issues that arise than when you're, say, rendering just a building, maybe a building interior. And the biggest thing to consider is how are you going to render it? So if you are going to render it, say, just using Revit's internal rendering system, and I've got the view here. I didn't really develop this model a whole lot, but I put some materials on. There's a different material for kind of like a smooth lawn, and then a rougher material, rougher grassy material for the kind of area outside the lawn. And then this brown area is just kind of like the rest of the site. And using Revit's internal rendering system, I'll just click the little teapot button, and let's set it to medium and exterior sun, and take a look at what this looks like. And that was a very quick 37 seconds that it took. I just rendered it at a medium setting. And you can see here that the rendering is actually pretty nice. The materials look good, and you can make out all the different things. I don't actually remember what I applied to everything, but they certainly are starting to look like stone walls and grass and all that at this different setting. Now, those renderings can be fine. The problem, one problem, is that you are limited to the RPC trees that are available in Revit. If you haven't used those before, under the component menu in the default template, you get a whole bunch of trees available, but I don't think there are any free sources of RPC components. I think you have to pay if you want additional ones. So that's an issue that you may or may not want to have to deal with. Of course, sometimes we can do a better job with just some fancy footwork in Photoshop, and so maybe it's not necessary to have the trees in your main model. So that's one decision. Now, if you decide you want to use an external renderer, obviously the simpler options are something like Enscape, which is a great add-in to Revit. And here's a view from Enscape. You can see it has taken the trees and kind of converted them into something that Enscape can recognize. And Enscape does have a limited library of trees and other plantings. And it even puts a kind of generic landscape in the background, and there are ways to control that. So it actually looks pretty good, all things considered. Again, you don't have the huge library of trees, but it is actually not bad at all. However, the one thing that is tricky with Enscape is that it's not quite as robust when it comes to the larger planting and landscape library. And also, Lumion, the one which I'll show you in a moment here, they really have a lot of options for editing the landscape, like actually changing the geomorphology of the land. So let's take a look at that. So here's a view from Lumion, and what you'll see, the materials transfer over the same as Enscape, but the thing that does not transfer are the trees. Now, that's considered a big bummer, but on the other hand, there are a lot more trees available in Lumion, and they are very easily placed. I'm not going to go into all the bits and pieces of how you would do that, but I will say that here, when you go into your in-build mode and you click on the tree option, or nature, and you click place, the library shows up, and there are literally dozens and dozens of trees, and there is some quite sophisticated control with the colors, the season, and then there are all sorts of other things, flowers and other stuff. So you can really generate a lot of landscape very quickly. One of the really fun things that I like playing with is the ability to place trees and other objects along a line. And you can just draw a line and add in trees into the kind of groups that are selected. See how it adds a couple of trees in there, and then here, let's go pick some other trees. This one here looks pretty nice. We'll add that in, and you can add quite a few different trees to kind of I don't know, get a little variety. We'll add one of these in, and then you can easily increase the number of trees, and you can kind of randomize them, and you can even offset them from the line. You can pretty quickly generate kind of a little forest happening here, and this is really nice because it's a very quick way to kind of generate a more naturalistic look. So placing landscape is a big advantage in Lumion. However, the one big thing which is different is that if you are planning to render your model, your landscape model, with a lot of hardscape items, there are some decisions that you'll have to make about how to approach this in Lumion. So basically, you have to kind of divide up your thinking into several pieces, because you will not be doing the entire landscape, probably, in Revit using the toposolid features. You will only be doing some of it. And first of all, anything which is a hardscape item that follows the contours, which is to say probably like a road, maybe a lawn, even possibly a driveway, those things that follow the contour, those are going to want to stay. And those are typically done by the breaking duplicating the surface, the toposolid surface, and that's fine. And in Revit, you can absolutely isolate those. The things which, even things like paved paths, you can do using that same technique in Revit. Now, also, things that are largely flat-ish with square or linear edges, again, something like a lawn, but also a patio, those are going to be items that you'll want to draw in Revit using the features mentioned before. Things like floors are probably the best option. Also, things that are hardscape items that might have a lot of detail, you're probably going to bring those in as components, something like a playing field, a basketball court, even a soccer field. Those will probably be some kind of component that you can bring in. Now, many of those are available in the Lumion component library. They're often a little easier to deal with in Revit, even if it's through SketchUp and the SketchUp 3D warehouse. However, the one thing that you can't draw easily in Revit are things that have softer edges. And I'm thinking of something like a gravel path or a beach, an ocean's edge, or a pond edge. Really, any water feature is going to be very tricky to model using a toposolid. So those features we are absolutely going to want to draw in Lumion. And let me show you how to do that. So back in Revit, first of all, I can hide all of these RPCs. I'll just do that using the visibility and graphic overrides. But then you're going to want to hide any of the site features that are not going to help you in Lumion. So I'm going to hide this existing site here. Oops, hide elements, not the whole category, because that will actually remove your toposolid split surfaces here. And then I'm going to hide this overall area because I think I want a more naturalistic look to the landscape here. But this still leaves the road and the lawn and the playing court kind of area. So, and of course, all the landscape walls and things like that. So if I go back to Lumion, what you'll see is basically I have a bunch of pieces floating in the air. Because I had the site underneath this, it looked as if it was being supported by the ground, but it's really not. Now, you might say, well, this doesn't look really all that great. And probably there are basically two ways you can go and fix the landscape in Lumion. You can go to the Landscape tab, and first of all, there is a height adjuster. And what you can do, I'm going to change this brush size and make it really big, and I'll just kind of tap, and it brings the landscape up. If you're familiar with SketchUp, this is essentially a push-pull. We can go up, we can go down, and I'm just clicking. I can also slow this down and use essentially a brush, and click and drag, and it will, oops, I'm going the wrong way. It will bring the landscape up or down depending on the direction that I want it to go. And the advantage of this is you can have a lot of subtle control, maybe not as precise as editing individual points, but you can see you can kind of contour the landscape and kind of make a nice, lovely little soft edges to things. You can bring up parts of the landscape or bring them down with kind of more subtle control. If you bring it up a little too fast, it will actually add in some rock, which is a feature. So one, you can lower it down in different places, but you have these other features, including smooth, which will kind of, like you might imagine, smooth it out. The opposite is jitter, where it'll kind of make the landscape kind of more rocky. So the landscape tools are awfully handy for kind of painting landscape. When you're not sure what you want to do, you can use this. Now, we have an existing landscape already, so I'm going to flatten what's here. And instead, I'm going to bring in a file which has the landscape loaded into it. And the way that you do that is you go to the menu button here, and there's a load landscape map option. Now, I have created this landscape map. Obviously, if you don't have one, you'll have to create the landscape yourself using these tools. You can, of course, always use the Revit toposolid. You just won't be able to create some of the soft landscape features that I'm about to show you. So here's my site. I'll just load it in. It's a DDS file. And what it does is it basically uses a black and white image to load in some of the landscape height features. And you can see it's a rocky landscape, which is in fact what it is. Now there's some subtleties here. For example, I do seem like I have a little bit of landscape encroaching on my patio. So I would want to come and use my subtle brush tool here to push and pull the landscape up or down. And one thing that you can do is back in Revit, you can control the height of the things like the patio area so that it is above the adjacent landscape. You can even just add a little bit of thickness onto it. And it does take a lot of patience to get it to be exactly right. But of course, you know, that's the rendering software as we know it. The other thing is that if it is your intent to have a lawn, you see how I did not bother trying to smooth out and flatten this landscape where the lawn is. Instead, I have made that into from a Revit component. So anyway, I think I need to bring up some of this landscape here so that we have a little bit. And you have to be, if you click and drag, it does go a little faster. So you do have to be careful about overdoing it and going a little too far. There, I think I've done a little too far, but let's just shrink this down. So I tried to smooth out this little section here where I'd like to have, say, a gravel path. And now I can come into this landscape paintbrush and choose a material to paint, essentially, this area. And it works just like the other tool. You can kind of click and drag, and depending on the speed of your brush here, I'll turn that up a little bit, it will create essentially a path, but it'll have a softer edge. And you might say, well, why would I do this? Well, maybe I want a gravel driveway, a section of gravel driveway between the road and the main part of the parking area of the house. You cannot paint anything other than the landscape, so it is somewhat limited, and it will only paint landscape that is Lumion based landscape. So let's say I want a path from the back of the house around the yard and over to our little basketball court. Again, I'd have to change these features, the brush speed, maybe the brush size, and I'll just come and I'll click and drag, and you can see that that looks a lot like a very naturalistic kind of path. So it's a very different way of drawing the landscape, a little more fuzzy, a little softer, say, than using the Revit-based components and objects. And then, of course, you can come and put plantings and things like that all along the sides of this and really create a very compelling landscape. Another feature you can add here on the Landscape tab is this Landscape Grass. If I just turn that on, here I make the grass grow a little bit. There we go. Look at how wild it gets. Again, that kind of makes it look a little more naturalistic. Just a fun way to kind of add features. Again, you sometimes want a variety of landscape characteristics in your project. Another fun feature that you can add here in Lumion is the ocean. So if you go here to the ocean tab and just turn it on, and you can kind of change the height of the ocean. Whoa, that's a lot of ocean rise there. You see how I can just drag it up. If you hold down Shift, it will move it a little more slowly. So obviously our site is not really that close to the ocean, but you can see that that's a pretty dramatic effect. Kind of a nice thing, and there's a number of features that you can control with the ocean. Lastly, if you just want a pond, say a little bit of water, what you can do is add a water component, and you can just click and drag, and it's kind of an area of water. And you see here I can stretch it out, I can move it up or down, and let's say I want maybe a little pond behind this basketball court. I'll push it over here, but I'll make it low, and then I'll come in and push down the landscape. And in theory, what you should see is like, oh, I guess it's pushing it pretty fast. You'll see a little bit of a pond. Okay, and I guess I graphic out a little bit much. My basketball court is gonna go pretty fast. It's gonna fall into the water. There we go. Okay, smooth that out. So anyway, that's a fun way with the water that you can kind of effectively create a pond or a pool, for example, a swimming pool, without needing like some kind of fully rendered component in there. These are quite simple. One other fun landscape feature that you can modify in Lumion has to do with a special materials property. Let me grab this retaining wall and maybe swap it out for something a little nicer. There's a nice aged stone wall. And you can come in and fiddle around with the materials as you see fit to make it kind of have the look that you like. Here, let's see if we can get a little more displacement. Yeah, pretty good. Anyway, one of the cool things is you can add foliage to the wall. Just pick a kind of foliage that you like and choose the spread. And as you drag the spread, the leaves essentially spread along the wall. If you hold down Shift, the spread moves a little bit more slowly because otherwise it's really hard to control. Anyway, and you can control the size of the leaves, and you can even colorize them a little bit if you want them to be more or less colorful. So kind of a fun feature, and you can add that to almost any material, I think. You can also, there is, I believe, an aging feature here, a weathering feature. So if you click on the stone wall, and this doesn't always look great here. Let's get a little closer up view of the wall and change the weatherings. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I totally buy that one. But anyway, you can see that the leaves are kind of a fun way to get it to look like a more naturalistic sort of thing. Another cool feature of Lumion, but also other rendering programs, is the ability to download OpenStreetMap information. So again, on the landscape tab here of the build menu, I can turn on OpenStreetMap and a warning pops up saying, "Did you know this is a beta?" And it's like, yeah, I know. Let me go. And you can pick a GPS coordinate if you know it off the top of your head, or you can actually just type in an address. I'm going to type in the address of our campus here, and there it is. Let's zoom in and see what we're at, where we're at. And oh yeah, here we go. Here's our campus, and you can actually kind of subtly drag the site around. You might be able to see in the background that actually the site is kind of moving around, and you can reorient the site to kind of tweak it to the actual site conditions. This is probably about as close as I'm going to get. And then you can include things like height maps and satellite maps, and you can download the whole kit and caboodle right into your model, which does take a minute or so. And you can see here in our site map that it actually has a fair amount of data about the buildings in the area. I don't believe it has the height maps exactly right, but it's got the ocean, it's got a satellite view, and you can kind of toggle these on and off. And this is great when you have, say, a project where you want to show larger context. In our case, some of these roads are actually not really roads; they're actually paths through the woods. So, maybe we'll turn those off. But you can see that the satellite information is actually pretty handy for a number of different features, and you can always just turn these things on and off as you see fit. So if you decide you don't want to see the buildings, you can just turn them all on and off, or you can kind of pick ones one at a time to turn them on and off. Anyway, and then if you decide you don't want the OpenStreetMap at all, you can just turn that off. And sometimes what I have found is if you have higher resolution data, maybe from one of the online downloadable contours websites, terrain websites, the data might be more precise than what you're seeing in OpenStreetMap. So there might be a little bit of a conflict, and especially on a project like this, which is fairly small, you are going to want a fairly high resolution of contours and the geography. One last feature that is unique, I think, to the better renderers is the ability to change the weather. Wish we had this in real life, but alas, we don't. So if you go to the camera mode here, you can store a camera and save different views of your project. And Lumion has a bunch of effects. And some of them, if you go to this custom style feature, these effects just kind of affect everything. They can make it overcast or daytime or whatever. We'll just make it daytime. And these have a number of different effects, including something like called Real Sky, which gives you much more natural lighting. But the one that is really my favorite, if you go to the FX menu and click on the little sky weather tab to jump to that one, you can find that there is a precipitation tool. And this is really great for mimicking the weather. And there's just a whole bunch of features which you can easily play with. You can make it snowy instead of rainy. My computer does take a little bit of time to regenerate the image, so that's why you'll see it kind of gray at first. But fun thing is you see the snow even on the leaves, which I think is actually kind of a really fun feature. And of course, when you're designing a landscape and thinking about how your building works in the landscape, you do want to think about the weather. Wouldn't it be cool to represent it in these different phases? Again, you can use the sliders in any different way. So here it's like just starting to snow, and then here it's been snowing for quite a while. You can also add particles in the foreground, which kind of give it that snowy look. You can even make them bigger, so it's like a big fluffy snowstorm. And you can have the ground blocked by plants and trees. So underneath trees, it's a little tricky to see, but in the background here, you can see that under my tree, there's actually no snow, even though it's kind of a scraggly looking tree. But again, it just gives it that little bit of realism. And then you can add, if it's raining, you can add things like rain streaks, which will affect the rendering, or if it's an animation, obviously you will see those in animated form. So a number of really fun and interesting features that you can use in Lumion. You just need to plan ahead in your model, decide what is going to look hardscape and what things are going to look more naturalistic. And then go and try your best to create the hardscape items in Revit, and the more naturalistic items, you'd create those in Lumion.